Jeremy Morris's voice sends an involuntary shudder through Celine's body, her violet skin flushing a deep indigo. The Krenim ambassador's daughter can't control her reaction, and her father's compound eyes narrow with suspicion. "What manner of influence do you wield over my daughter, human?" Ambassador Tuvok's antennae quiver with barely contained anger. Jeremy raises his hands, palms out. "I assure you, Ambassador, I'm doing nothing intentional. I'm as confused as you are." The ostentatious meeting chamber, with its swirling holographic displays and sleek bioorganic furnishings, suddenly feels claustrophobic. Jeremy's heart races. This diplomatic mission to the Krenim homeworld, humanity's first contact with the advanced but reclusive species, balances on a knife's edge. Celine, her hands trembling, grips the edge of the conference table. "Father, please. It's not his fault. I don't understand what's happening to me." Jeremy's mind races. The United Earth government sent him to secure access to the Krenim's terraforming technology, crucial for humanity's expansion to harsh exoplanets. Failure isn't an option, but he's out of his depth. "Perhaps we should adjourn briefly," Jeremy suggests, keeping his voice low and steady. To his dismay, even this causes Celine to shiver visibly. Ambassador Tuvok's exoskeleton clicks as he shifts, agitated. "No, we will get to the bottom of this now. Guards!" Two Krenim soldiers enter, their biomechanical armor humming with energy. Jeremy tenses, acutely aware of how far from home he is. A commotion outside draws their attention. Through the chamber's transparent walls, Jeremy sees a group of Krenim officials approaching. Their steps falter as they near, some stumbling, others pressing hands to their auditory organs. "What devilry is this?" Tuvok demands, his voice rising to a pitch that makes Jeremy wince. One of the newcomers, a willowy Krenim with elaborate cranial ridges, speaks. "Ambassador, it's not just your daughter. We're all experiencing something when the human speaks. It's like our bodies are resonating with his voice." The room erupts in a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and hums as the Krenim communicate in their native tongue. Jeremy stands silent, knowing any word from him will only exacerbate the situation. His communication implant buzzes. A message from Earth. "Morris, what's the holdup? We need that tech. Close the deal." Jeremy suppresses a groan. If only they knew. Celine approaches him cautiously, her large luminescent eyes fixed on his face. "Your species. You've never encountered this before?" Jeremy shakes his head, then remembers to speak. "Never. We didn't even know it was possible." His words send another visible wave through her body, but she stands her ground. "It's not unpleasant, just overwhelming, like every cell in my body is alive and singing." Ambassador Tuvok interjects, "Enough! This changes everything. If humans can affect us so profoundly without even trying, what else are they capable of? The negotiations are suspended until we can determine if you pose a threat to our people." Jeremy's stomach drops. He's about to protest when he notices the other Krenim in the room. Some look afraid, but others, their eyes shine with curiosity, even excitement. He realizes he's standing at a crossroads of interstellar relations. The next few moments could determine the future of human-Krenim interaction. With Earth's demands weighing on him and the eyes of every Krenim in the room fixed on his alien form, Jeremy takes a deep breath and prepares to navigate the most critical diplomatic challenge of his career. Jeremy's mind raced as he surveyed the room, acutely aware of the tension crackling through the air. The Krenim officials' reactions to his voice had thrown the negotiations into chaos, but he refused to let this unexpected development derail the mission. Taking a deep breath, he spoke carefully, modulating his tone to minimize its effect on the aliens. "Ambassador Tuvok, esteemed delegates," he began, noting the visible shudder that passed through the assembled Krenim, "I propose we approach this situation scientifically. Let's conduct a study to understand the physiological effects of human voices on Krenim biology. This way we can determine if there's any real threat and potentially find a solution." Tuvok's compound eyes narrowed, his antennae twitching as he considered the proposal. After a moment of tense silence, he nodded. "Your suggestion has merit, human. We shall make our advanced medical facilities available for this study." Within hours, a team of Krenim xenobiologists had been assembled. their exoskeletons clicking as they moved efficiently through the sleek, bioorganic laboratory. Jeremy found himself at the center of their attention, various scanning devices humming as they passed over his body. Celine stood nearby, her violet skin still flushed a deep indigo. As the most affected by Jeremy's voice, she had been designated as the key Krenim participant in the study. Their eyes met across the room, and Jeremy felt a flutter in his stomach that had nothing to do with the alien technology surrounding him. Days passed in a whirlwind of tests and experiments. Jeremy spoke into various devices, modulating his voice in different ways as the Krenim scientists monitored the reactions of their volunteers. Celine was always present, her large, luminescent eyes fixed on Jeremy with a mixture of fascination and something else he couldn't quite identify. As they worked side by side, Jeremy found himself drawn to Celine's intelligence and curiosity. They spent hours discussing the differences between their species, their conversations punctuated by the occasional shiver from Celine when Jeremy's voice hit a particular frequency. One evening, as they analyzed data together in a quiet corner of the lab, Celine leaned in close, her antennae quivering. "We've made a breakthrough," she whispered, her voice tinged with excitement. "Look at these brain scans." Jeremy studied the holographic display, his eyes widening as he understood the implications. "Specific frequencies in human speech stimulate pleasure centers in Krenim brains," he murmured, careful to keep his voice low. Celine nodded, a slight tremor running through her body at his words. "It explains my intense reactions," she said, her skin darkening with what Jeremy had come to recognize as a Krenim blush. The discovery sent ripples through the Krenim scientific community. Some saw it as an opportunity for positive cultural exchange, while others expressed concern about potential exploitation. Jeremy found himself at the center of heated debates, struggling to navigate the complex web of Krenim politics. As word spread, Jeremy noticed a shift in the way some Krenim regarded him. While many remained curious and even excited about the human presence, others eyed him with suspicion and fear. Whispers of threat and influence followed him through the winding corridors of the Krenim facilities. Despite the growing tension, Jeremy continued his work, driven by the need to find a solution. He spent countless hours in the lab, experimenting with different vocal techniques. Celine was always by his side, her presence both a comfort and a distraction. One night, as they worked late in the lab, Jeremy made a breakthrough. He spoke a series of words, carefully modulating his tone, and watched as Celine's reaction, while still visible, was significantly muted. "It worked!" he exclaimed, forgetting to control his voice in his excitement. Celine shuddered violently, gripping the edge of the workstation to steady herself. "Sorry," Jeremy said quickly, reverting to his newly developed technique. "But do you see? I think I found a way to minimize the involuntary reactions while still communicating clearly." Celine's eyes shone with excitement. "This could change everything," she said, reaching out to touch Jeremy's arm. The contact sent a jolt through him, and he realized how close they were standing. Their moment of triumph was interrupted by the lab doors sliding open. Ambassador Tuvok entered, his exoskeleton clicking ominously as he approached. "Celine," he said, his voice cold, "it's late. You should return to our quarters." Celine bristled, her antenna flattening against her head. "Father, we've just made a significant breakthrough. I need to stay and help analyze the results." Tuvok's compound eyes narrowed. "You've been spending far too much time with the human. It's not appropriate for someone of your station." As Celine argued with her father, Jeremy's communication implant buzzed. A message scrolled across his vision. "Urgent, anti-human protests erupting across the city. Extreme caution advised." Jeremy's stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to warn Tuvok and Celine, but before he could speak, an explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared, and the lab's bioluminescent lighting flashed red. "What's happening?" Celine cried, stumbling as another blast shook the floor. Tuvok's antennae quivered as he received information through his own implants. "It's General Anorax's faction," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They're attacking government buildings, demanding the expulsion of all humans." Jeremy's mind raced. The negotiations, the scientific breakthrough, all of it was in jeopardy. He looked at Celine, saw the fear and perseverance in her eyes, and made a split-second decision. "We need to get out of here," he said, using his new vocal technique to minimize its effect on the Krenim. "Ambassador, where's the nearest safe location?" But Tuvok was already moving towards the door, his exoskeleton expanding into a protective shell. "I must join the Defense Council. Celine, stay with the human. Your security detail will escort you to safety." As Tuvok disappeared into the chaos outside, Jeremy and Celine exchanged a look of understanding. Whatever happened next, they were in it together. Together. As the door slid shut behind Tuvok, Jeremy grabbed Celine's hand. "We need to move. Now." They sprinted through the chaos-filled corridors, alarms blaring, and emergency lights casting an eerie red glow. Krenim scientists and security personnel rushed past them, their exoskeletons clicking frantically. Jeremy's heart pounded as he led Celine towards the nearest exit, his mind racing to formulate a plan. As they burst out of the facility, the night air hit them like a wall. The city was in turmoil, with distant explosions illuminating the skyline. Celine stumbled, overwhelmed by the sensory assault and the lingering effects of Jeremy's voice. "We need to find cover," Jeremy whispered, using his newly developed vocal technique to minimize its impact on Celine. She nodded, her luminescent eyes wide with fear and commitment. They ducked into a narrow alley, pressing themselves against the bioorganic walls that seemed to pulse with the city's distress. Jeremy's communication implant buzzed again, but he ignored it, focusing on their immediate survival. As dawn broke, painting the alien sky in hues of green and purple, Jeremy and Celine found themselves in an abandoned section of the research facility. They had spent the night evading search parties, their close proximity and hiding spots intensifying the tension between them. "Look," Celine whispered, pointing to a securely locked storage unit. "That's where we keep our prototype tech." Jeremy examined the lock, his tech implant interfacing with the alien system. After a tense moment, the door hissed open, revealing rows of sleek devices. "Personal cloaking technology," he breathed, careful to modulate his voice. They quickly appropriated 2 devices, strapping them to their wrists. With a shimmer of energy, they vanished from sight. "Stay close," Jeremy murmured. "We need to share the field to conserve power." They moved through the awakening city, invisible to the naked eye, but acutely aware of each other. The streets were filled with Krenim going about their morning routines, oblivious to the invisible fugitives in their midst. In a bustling marketplace, they paused to catch their breath and gather information. Vendors argued in hushed tones about the night's events, their exoskeletons clicking nervously. "The human must be found," one merchant hissed. "They say his voice can control minds." Celine tensed beside Jeremy, her body reacting to even his quiet breathing. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble at his touch. As they navigated through a crowded plaza, Jeremy's cloaking device beeped softly, indicating low power. He leaned in close to Celine, his lips nearly brushing her auditory organ. "We need to find somewhere to recharge," he whispered. The effect was immediate. Celine's knees buckled, and Jeremy had to catch her to prevent them from becoming visible. The Krenim closest to them shivered, looking around in confusion at the sudden wave of pleasure that washed over them. "Sorry," Jeremy mouthed, holding Celine until she regained her composure. They made their way towards the outskirts of the city, where the buildings thinned and the spaceport loomed in the distance. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Sleek, drone-like devices swooped overhead, emitting pulses of energy. "Bioscanners," Celine gasped. "They're looking for your human signature." They ducked into a narrow alley as one of the drones passed overhead. Jeremy's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. The human diplomatic shuttle was their best chance of escape, but reaching it seemed impossible with the increased security. As they caught their breath, a familiar figure emerged from a nearby building. Dr. Kess, the Krenim scientist who had assisted in their earlier experiments, looked around furtively before entering a code into a concealed panel. Jeremy made a split-second decision. "Dr. Kess," he called softly, deactivating his cloaking device. The Krenim scientist spun around, her compound eyes widening in surprise. "Jeremy, Celine, quickly inside!" They followed her into a hidden laboratory, the door sealing behind them with a soft hiss. Dr. Kess activated a series of jamming devices before turning to face them. "I've been analyzing our research data," she said, her antennae quivering with excitement. "You need to hear this." As Dr. Kess explained her findings about the cognitive enhancements caused by human vocal frequencies, Jeremy and Celine exchanged worried glances. The implications were staggering. "This could change everything," Celine breathed, her skin flushing deep indigo. Dr. Kess nodded gravely, "Which is why General Anarax is so determined to capture you. He fears the changes this could bring to our society." A distant explosion rocked the building. Dr. Kess rushed to a communications terminal. "We need to get you off planet. I can give you access to a secure channel to contact Earth." As Jeremy began transmitting a coded message to his superiors, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Kess's exoskeleton clicked anxiously. "They've found us. You must go." In the ensuing chaos, Jeremy and Celine were separated from Dr. Kess. They fled into a crowded underground transit system, the close quarters amplifying the effect of Jeremy's voice on Celine and the surrounding Krenim. Realizing the potential of this effect, Jeremy made a bold decision. He spoke loudly, deliberately using his unmodulated voice. "Everyone, remain calm and proceed to the nearest exit." The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Krenim throughout the station shuddered in pleasure, some collapsing to the ground, others embracing strangers in sudden fits of euphoria. In the confusion, Jeremy and Celine slipped past Anarax's security forces. They emerged into a large square, only to find themselves in the middle of an anti-human protest. The lingering effects of Jeremy's voice in the station below added to the crowd's agitation, creating a volatile atmosphere. Celine, overwhelmed by the compounded stimuli, swayed on her feet. "Jeremy," she gasped, her eyes rolling back as she collapsed into his arms. With the unconscious Celine cradled against his chest, Jeremy pushed through the chaotic crowd. The prototype cloaking device flickered weakly, its power nearly depleted. In the distance, he could see Anarax's troops advancing, their weapons drawn. Desperation fueling his steps, Jeremy spotted an unguarded Krenim scout ship on the outskirts of the city. It was their only chance. As the angry mob and Anarax's forces converged on their location, Jeremy made a run for the ship, his heart pounding with each step. The cloaking device gave out just as they reached the ship's entry ramp. Shouts of alarm rose from the crowd as Jeremy frantically interfaced with the ship's locking mechanism. Behind him, he could hear the heavy footsteps of Anarax's troops drawing closer. As the ship's door began to open with an agonizing slowness, Jeremy turned to face the advancing forces, cradling Celine protectively. He knew that his next actions could jeopardize the entire diplomatic mission, but at that moment, all that mattered was their survival. With one arm supporting Celine, Jeremy reached for the ship's controls, praying he could figure out how to operate the alien craft before it was too late. Late. His fingers flew across the alien interface, desperately trying to activate the ship's systems. Suddenly, the console lit up, responding to Jeremy's frantic inputs. The ship hummed to life, its engines powering up with a low vibration that thrummed through the hull. "Yes!" Jeremy exclaimed, his excitement momentarily overriding his caution. The sound of his voice sent a shudder through Celine's unconscious form, reminding him of the need for control. He carefully maneuvered Celine into the co-pilot's seat, securing her with the alien restraints as best he could. The shouts of Anarax's approaching troops grew louder, spurring Jeremy to action. With a deep breath, he gripped the unfamiliar controls and initiated the launch sequence. The ship lurched upward, nearly knocking Jeremy off his feet. He stumbled back into the pilot's chair, wrestling with the controls as the vessel shot into the sky. Energy blasts from Anarax's weapons sizzled past the view screen, narrowly missing the ship. Jeremy's heart raced as he pushed the engines to their limit, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Jeremy allowed himself a moment of relief, but his respite was short-lived. The ship's sensors blared a warning, revealing a Krenim blockade directly in their path. "Celine," Jeremy called softly, trying to rouse her without causing further discomfort. "I need your help." Celine stirred, her luminescent eyes fluttering open. She groaned, her body still trembling from the intense stimulation caused by Jeremy's earlier outburst in the transit system. Where are we? She mumbled, struggling to focus. We're in a Krenim scout ship trying to escape, Jeremy explained quickly, his voice carefully modulated. But there's a blockade ahead, and I don't know how to get past it. Celine's antennae twitched as she processed the information. Despite her disorientation, her training kicked in. She leaned forward, examining the ship's readouts. There, she pointed to a complex series of symbols. That's the weapon system. And here, she indicated another set of controls, are the shields. Jeremy nodded, grateful for her expertise. As they approached the blockade, a familiar voice crackled over the communication system. Unidentified vessel, this is Ambassador Tuvok. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. Jeremy and Celine exchanged a worried glance. The concern in Tuvok's voice was evident, but so was his dedication. We can't surrender, Celine said, her voice firm despite her weakened state. Not to Anarax. Jeremy nodded, an idea forming in his mind. I'm sorry about this, he said to Celine, before activating the ship's external speakers. Taking a deep breath, Jeremy spoke, his voice unmodulated and carrying across the communication channels to the entire Krenim fleet. This is Jeremy Sloan of Earth. We mean you no harm. We're seeking refuge from General Anarax's forces, who have violated diplomatic protocols and attempted to capture us illegally. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Krenim ships nearest to them began to drift, their crews momentarily incapacitated by the sound of Jeremy's voice. Celine gasped, her body arching in her seat as the sound washed over her. Jeremy seized the opportunity, pushing the damaged scout ship past the disoriented blockade. Alarms blared as the propulsion system strained under the stress. The engines are overheating, Celine warned, her voice breathy and strained. We can't maintain this speed for long. Jeremy scanned the ship's navigation system, looking for options. There, he said, pointing to a small rocky moon orbiting a nearby gas giant. We can try to land there and make repairs. As they approached the desolate moon, the ship's systems began to fail one by one. Warning lights flashed across the console as Jeremy struggled to keep the vessel under control. Hang on, he shouted, forgetting to modulate his voice in the heat of the moment. Celine cried out, a mix of pleasure and pain, as the ship plummeted toward the lunar surface. With a bone-jarring impact, the scout ship skidded across the barren landscape, kicking up plumes of dust and debris. It finally came to rest near a cluster of jagged rock formations, its hull scarred and smoking. For a moment, silence reigned inside the battered vessel. Then, with a groan, Jeremy unstrapped himself from the pilot's seat. Celine, are you all right? Celine nodded weakly, her exoskeleton clicking as she tried to move. I think so, but we need to get out of here. The ship's atmosphere containment could fail at any moment. Working together, they gathered what supplies they could salvage from the wreckage. Emergency rations, portable atmosphere generators, and a damaged communication array. As they stepped out onto the airless surface of the moon, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. They were stranded on a hostile world, with unknown pursuers potentially on their way. Jeremy looked at Celine, saw the persistence in her alien eyes, and felt a surge of admiration for her resilience. We need to find shelter, he said softly, careful to minimize the impact of his voice. Those rocks over there might offer some protection. As they made their way across the lunar landscape, the weight of their shared ordeal pressed down on them like the unfamiliar gravity of this alien world. The closeness forced upon them by circumstance only served to heighten the tension that had been building between them since their first meeting. Reaching the rocky outcropping, they began to set up a makeshift camp, their movements awkward in the bulky emergency suits. As Jeremy worked to establish a breathable atmosphere within their small shelter, he couldn't help but notice how Celine's body responded to his every word and movement. The isolation, the danger, and the intense physiological connection between them created an atmosphere charged with potential. As they huddled together in the confined space of their emergency shelter, Jeremy found himself acutely aware of Celine's alien, yet undeniably feminine presence. We should try to repair the communication array, Celine suggested, her voice hushed in the close quarters. It's our best chance of contacting help. Jeremy nodded, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the distracting proximity of his Krenim companion. As they worked together on the delicate circuitry, their hands brushing against each other, the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. As the lunar night fell, plunging their shelter into darkness, Jeremy and Celine found themselves sitting closer than ever, sharing warmth and the limited resources of their emergency supplies. The weight of their situation, the uncertainty of rescue, and the growing attraction between them created a potent emotional cocktail. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, a crackling sound from the communication array caught their attention. Fragments of a transmission began to filter through the static. "Utus extraction team, en route to your location. Krenim Battlefleet, General Anarax, override Ambassador Tuvok's authority." Jeremy and Celine looked at each other, hope and fear mingling in their expressions. Help was coming, but so was danger. As they processed this new information, the realization of how their next actions could impact the future of human-Krenim relations settled over them. In the dim light of their shelter, surrounded by the unforgiving lunar landscape, Jeremy and Celine faced a critical decision. The fate of two species might rest on their choices, but in that moment, the growing connection between them felt just as monumental as any interstellar conflict. As they contemplated their next move, the tension between them continued to build, a force as powerful and inexorable as the distant pull of the gas giant looming in the alien sky above. As the lunar night faded and the first rays of the distant sun crept over the horizon, Jeremy and Celine emerged from their makeshift shelter. The harsh landscape stretched before them, a stark reminder of their precarious situation. Despite the looming threat of Anarax's forces and the uncertainty of rescue, a new willpower had taken root between them. Jeremy took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities. "Celine, I have an idea," he said softly, mindful of the effect his voice had on her. "We might be able to use our unique situation to our advantage." Celine's antennae twitched with interest. "What do you mean?" "The scout ship," Jeremy explained, gesturing towards the battered vessel. "If we can modify its communication array, we might be able to amplify my voice across a wider area. It could give us an edge when Anarax's forces arrive." Celine's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. "A large-scale physiological effect on the Krenim troops," she mused. "It's risky, but it could work. I can help reconfigure the array to broadcast on specific frequencies." They set to work immediately, salvaging components from the crashed ship and repurposing them for their audacious plan. As they labored side by side, the physical proximity only heightened the tension between them. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, sent sparks of electricity through their bodies. Suddenly, a low rumble filled the air. Jeremy and Celine looked up to see multiple ships piercing the thin atmosphere of the moon. A sleek, dark vessel approached rapidly, the human extraction team, but close behind it loomed the massive form of Anarax's battlecruiser, its weapons already charging. "We're out of time," Jeremy said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to activate the array now." Celine made a final adjustment to the improvised device. "It's ready. But Jeremy, be careful. The amplification could have unforeseen effects on you as well." Jeremy nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. He took a deep breath and began to speak into the modified communication array. His unmodulated voice, now amplified 1,000-fold, boomed across the lunar surface and into space. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Krenim battlecruiser lurched in its orbit, its crew clearly affected by the broadcast. On the surface, the human extraction team stumbled as they emerged from their ship, caught off guard by the overwhelming sensory input. Commander Sarah Roberts, leading the human team, fought through the disorientation. "Sloan!" she called out, her voice strained. "What the hell is going on?" Before Jeremy could respond, a small research vessel appeared, deftly navigating through the chaos. It landed nearby, and Dr. Kess emerged carrying a data pad. "I've been monitoring the situation," she explained quickly. "I have data that could help stabilize the Krenim response to human vocal frequencies. If we integrate this into your broadcast, we might be able to turn this disruption into something positive. Working feverishly, Jeremy, Celine, and Dr. Kess modified the broadcast. As the new signal went out, a remarkable change began to sweep through the assembled forces. The Krenim soldiers' expressions shifted from pain and confusion to wonder and clarity. On board the battlecruiser, General Anarax gripped his command chair, his pupils dilating from the effects of the broadcast. But as the modified signal washed over him, his perspective began to shift. The rigid certainty that had driven his actions melted away, replaced by a newfound openness to possibility. "Stand down all weapons," he ordered, his voice resonating with newfound conviction. "Open a channel for negotiations." As the tensions in orbit eased, Commander Roberts approached Jeremy and Celine. "I don't know what you two have done," she said, shaking her head in amazement, "but you've just changed the course of human-Krenim relations." Jeremy and Celine exchanged a look, their shared ordeal and triumph creating an unbreakable bond between them. As representatives from both sides began to converge on their position, they knew that their unique connection would be crucial in shaping the future of interspecies cooperation. The desolate moon, once a battlefield, now hummed with activity as a temporary base for negotiations was established. Dr. Kess presented her findings to a hastily assembled joint scientific committee, while Jeremy and Celine prepared for debriefing. As they waited, Jeremy turned to Celine, his voice low and intense. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know—" But before he could finish, they were called into the makeshift conference room. The future of two species awaited, and their story was just the beginning. Their shared experience had forged a connection that transcended species. And as they entered the conference room, both knew their lives would never be the same. The makeshift facility buzzed with activity as human and Krenim scientists hurriedly set up equipment. Dr. Kess stood at the center, her eyes bright with excitement as she addressed the assembled delegates. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what we've witnessed here is nothing short of revolutionary. The physiological compatibility between humans and Krenim opens up possibilities we've never imagined." Jeremy and Celine exchanged glances as they took their seats. Commander Roberts leaned in, her voice low. "You two are about to become the most studied individuals in the galaxy." Dr. Kess continued, pulling up holographic displays of neural scans. "We propose a series of controlled experiments to further explore the effects of human vocal frequencies on Krenim biology. With your permission, we'd like Jeremy and Celine to be our primary subjects." General Anarax, his demeanor markedly changed from his earlier aggression, nodded thoughtfully. "This could be the key to a new era of cooperation between our species." Ambassador Tuvok raised an eyebrow. "While the potential benefits are clear, we must proceed with caution. The long-term effects of such exposure are unknown." As the discussion continued, Jeremy felt a gentle touch on his arm. Celine leaned close, her antennae quivering. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered. Jeremy took a deep breath, acutely aware of how his voice might affect her. "Together," he murmured, careful to keep his tone neutral. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The desolate moon transformed into a hub of scientific inquiry as equipment from both human and Krenim ships was shuttled to the surface. A state-of-the-art research facility took shape around them, with Jeremy and Celine at its core. Their first session began with a battery of baseline tests. Jeremy stood in a sound-isolated chamber, speaking into a modulated microphone, while Celine sat in an adjacent room, her body connected to a myriad of sensors. "Beginning vocal frequency test 1, a human scientist announced. Jeremy, please recite the provided text." Jeremy cleared his throat and began to speak, his unmodulated voice carrying clearly through the speakers. In the observation room, the scientists watched in awe as Celine's neural activity spiked dramatically. "Incredible," Dr. Kess murmured, her eyes fixed on the readings. "Look at the activation in the prefrontal cortex. It's as if her entire brain is lighting up." As the days wore on, the experiments grew more complex. Jeremy learned to modulate his voice in specific patterns, each eliciting unique responses from Celine. The Krenim scientists were particularly intrigued by the activation of dormant genes in Celine's DNA. Her physical stamina has increased by 30%, one Krenim researcher reported, and her sensory perception is off the charts. But it wasn't just Celine who was changing. Jeremy began to notice subtle shifts in his own physiology. His reaction times improved, and he found himself able to process complex information with surprising ease. During a break between sessions, Jeremy and Celine found a quiet moment alone in the facility's observation deck. The gas giant loomed large in the viewport, its swirling storms a backdrop to their conversation. "How are you holding up?" Jeremy asked, his voice soft with concern. Celine's exoskeleton clicked as she shifted closer. "It's intense," she admitted. "Every time I hear your voice, it's like I'm more alive than I've ever been." Their eyes met, and Jeremy felt a surge of emotion. The constant proximity, the shared experiences, and the unique intimacy of their interactions had deepened their connection beyond anything he could have imagined. Before either could speak further, an alarm blared through the facility. They rushed to the main laboratory, where they found Dr. Kess and Commander Roberts in heated discussion with a holographic projection of a Krenim politician. "This is Obrist," Roberts explained quickly. "He's the leader of a growing isolationist movement on the Krenim homeworld." Obrist's voice crackled with almost unchecked anger. "These experiments must cease immediately. You risk contaminating our entire species with this human influence." As the argument escalated, Jeremy noticed Celine swaying slightly. He reached out to steady her, and the moment their skin made contact, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. "Jeremy," Celine gasped, her eyes wide. "I think we need to—" But before she could finish, the facility rocked with a sudden impact. Alarms blared as emergency protocols engaged. "We're under attack!" Commander Roberts shouted, rushing to a nearby console. "Multiple Krenim ships have entered orbit. They're demanding we surrender the research facility." As chaos erupted around them, Jeremy and Celine found themselves at the center of a storm that threatened to tear apart the fragile peace between their species. The experiments had triggered changes neither of them fully understood, and now they faced a threat that could destroy everything they had worked for. With alarms blaring and the facility shaking from orbital bombardment, Jeremy grabbed Celine's hand. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Together. As they raced through the chaotic corridors of the facility, alarms blaring and emergency lights flashing, Jeremy felt an overwhelming urge to protect Celine. Without thinking, he pulled her close and kissed her passionately. Time seemed to stand still as their lips met. The chaos around them faded into the background, replaced by a surge of emotions and sensations unlike anything either of them had experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and wide-eyed. I'm sorry," Jeremy stammered, suddenly aware of the gravity of what he'd done. "I don't know what came over me." Celine's antennae quivered, her exoskeleton flushed with a vibrant blue hue. "Don't apologize," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. Their moment was abruptly interrupted by Ambassador Tuvok, who rounded the corner with a team of security personnel. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene before him. "This experiment has gone too far," Tuvok declared, his voice stern. "I'm ordering an immediate halt to all research activities. Celine, come with me. We need to discuss the implications of your involvement." As Celine was led away, Jeremy caught a glimpse of Dr. Kess and Commander Roberts engaged in a heated discussion with a holographic projection. The image flickered, revealing the face of a Krenim politician Jeremy recognized as Obrist, the leader of the growing isolationist movement. "This is an outrage," Obrist's voice boomed through the facility. "Your reckless experiments threaten the very fabric of Krenim society. We demand an immediate end to this cooperation." Commander Roberts turned to Jeremy, her expression grim. "The situation on the Krenim homeworld is deteriorating rapidly. Obrist's followers are organizing massive protests in the capital city. We need to contain this before it spirals out of control." As the diplomatic crisis unfolded, Jeremy began to notice strange sensations coursing through his body. His mind raced, processing information at an unprecedented speed. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more crisp. He stumbled, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of sensory input. Dr. Kess rushed to his side, her medical scanner whirring. Jeremy, your neural activity is off the charts. We need to run some tests immediately. In the makeshift lab, Jeremy sat surrounded by a web of sensors and monitors. Dr. Kess and her team worked feverishly, analyzing the data streaming across their screens. This is remarkable, Dr. Kess murmured, her eyes wide with excitement and concern. Jeremy, it appears that your prolonged exposure to selene and other krenim has triggered dormant genes in your DNA. You're experiencing physiological changes similar to those we observed in krenim subjects exposed to human vocal frequencies. Before Jeremy could process this information, General Anarax burst into the lab, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and ambition. This changes everything, Anarax declared. Imagine a specialized task force of humans and krenim, enhanced by these genetic activations. We could revolutionize interstellar peacekeeping, scientific research, even space exploration. Ambassador Tuvok, who had entered behind Anarax, shook his head firmly. We cannot rush into such a controversial program without fully understanding the consequences. The ethical implications alone. Their debate was cut short as Commander Roberts received an urgent transmission. Her face paled as she listened to the message. We have a situation, she announced grimly. Earth Command has ordered Jeremy's immediate extraction. They're citing health and security concerns. The room erupted into chaos as arguments broke out between the human and krenim officials. Jeremy's head spun, his enhanced senses overwhelmed by the cacophony of voices and emotions. Suddenly, Selene burst into the lab, her exoskeleton pulsing with agitation. I've made a decision, she declared, silencing the room. I want to volunteer for the experimental procedure to stabilize the physiological reactions caused by human vocal frequencies. Dr. Kess stepped forward, her voice filled with concern. Selene, you must understand the risks. This procedure is entirely theoretical. We have no guarantee of success, and the potential side effects. I understand the risks, Selene interrupted, her gaze locked with Jeremy's. But if there's a chance it could pave the way for safer human-krenim interactions, I have to try. As the implications of Selene's decision sank in, alarms blared throughout the facility once more. Commander Roberts rushed to a nearby console, her face growing pale as she read the incoming transmission. We've got a major problem, she announced, her voice tight with tension. Obrist's followers have seized control of a krenim military installation. They've got access to a long-range weapon capable of targeting this moon base. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. Jeremy's enhanced mind raced, processing potential scenarios and outcomes at lightning speed. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. I have an idea, he said, drawing all eyes to him. Let me address the krenim people directly. With my enhanced cognitive abilities, I might be able to bridge the gap between our species and quell this rising isolationism. General Anarak's eyes lit up with interest, but Ambassador Tuvok shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. The risk is too great. If we send you to the krenim homeworld now, there's no guarantee of your safety. As the debate raged on, Dr. Kess suddenly gasped, her eyes fixed on a data readout. I think I've found something, she exclaimed. A carefully calibrated combination of human vocal frequencies and krenim biopulses could create a harmonizing effect. It might stabilize the extreme reactions while preserving the beneficial enhancements. Before anyone could respond to this breakthrough, a krenim scout ship arrived with urgent news. The situation on the homeworld had escalated beyond their worst fears. A radical faction of Obrist's movement had taken control of a major city, threatening to destroy key scientific and cultural sites unless all humans left krenim space immediately. As the weight of the crisis bore down on them, Jeremy and Selene exchanged a long look. In that moment, they both realized the magnitude of the choice before them, to pursue their personal relationship or to prioritize the greater good of their respective species. The fate of human-krenim relations hung in the balance, and the next few hours would determine the course of history for both their peoples. With time running out and the threat of violence looming, Jeremy took a deep breath, his enhanced mind formulating a plan. We need to act now, he said, his voice filled with perseverance. and I think I know how we can turn this crisis into an opportunity for lasting peace. Peace. As they raced through the chaotic corridors of the facility, alarms blaring and emergency lights flashing, Jeremy felt an overwhelming urge to protect Celine. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. In that moment, they both knew what they had to do. "We need to address this crisis head-on," Jeremy said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Celine nodded, her antennae quivering with tenacity. "Together, we might be the key to resolving this conflict." They made their way to the command center, where Ambassador Tuvok, Commander Roberts, and Dr. Kez were huddled around a holographic display of the Krenim homeworld. "Ambassador, Commander," Jeremy called out as they entered, "Celine and I want to volunteer to lead a joint human Krenim team to address the crisis on the homeworld directly." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the unlikely pair. Ambassador Tuvok raised an eyebrow, his Vulcan features betraying a hint of surprise. "That would be an extremely risky endeavor," he said, his tone measured. "The situation on the ground is volatile, to say the least." Commander Roberts stepped forward, her expression a mix of concern and intrigue. "What makes you think you can make a difference?" Jeremy took a deep breath, feeling the enhanced cognitive abilities coursing through his mind. "Our unique bond, the very thing that's causing so much fear and confusion, could be our greatest asset. We can show them that human-Krenim cooperation isn't just possible. It's beneficial." Dr. Kess, who had been silent until now, suddenly perked up. "Actually, this could work in our favor. I've just made a breakthrough that might help." She pulled up a complex series of data streams on a nearby monitor. A carefully calibrated combination of human vocal frequencies and Krenim biopulses could create a harmonizing effect. It might stabilize the extreme reactions while preserving the beneficial enhancements. As the implications of this discovery sank in, the room buzzed with renewed energy. Commander Roberts began coordinating with the security teams, while Dr. Kess and her medical staff prepared for the procedures ahead. Jeremy underwent an intensive crash course to harness his newly awakened abilities. Hours blurred together as he pushed his enhanced mind to its limits, absorbing information at an unprecedented rate. Meanwhile, Celine volunteered for the experimental procedure to stabilize her reactions to human voices. In the medical bay, Jeremy watched anxiously as Dr. Kess and her team worked on Celine. The procedure was risky, involving a delicate balance of human vocal frequencies and Krenim biotechnology. As the minutes ticked by, Jeremy found himself holding his breath, his enhanced senses hyper-aware of every beep and hum of the medical equipment. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Celine's eyes fluttered open. She sat up slowly, her exoskeleton shimmering with a new subtle iridescence. "How do you feel?" Jeremy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Celine turned to him, her eyes clear and focused. "I feel balanced, like I can finally think clearly without being overwhelmed by your voice." Their moment of relief was short-lived. Commander Roberts burst into the medical bay, her face grim. "We've just received word from the Krenim homeworld. Obrist's followers have taken control of the central government complex in the capital city. They're threatening to destroy key scientific and cultural sites unless all humans leave Krenim space immediately." Jeremy and Celine exchanged a determined look. "We're ready," Jeremy said, standing up. "Let's go." As they boarded the shuttle bound for the Krenim homeworld, Jeremy felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. He looked over at Celine, who sat calmly in the co-pilot's seat, her antennae twitching slightly as she monitored the ship's systems. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his enhanced mind already calculating the countless variables and potential outcomes of their mission. Celine turned to him, her compound eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the viewport. "We've come too far to turn back now, Jeremy. Whatever happens, we face it together." As the shuttle broke through the atmosphere of the Krenim homeworld, the true scale of the crisis became apparent. The capital city sprawled below them, usually a marvel of alien architecture and technology, now marred by plumes of smoke and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. They landed in a cleared area near the government complex, greeted by a mix of anxious Krenim officials and stern-faced human diplomats. As Jeremy and Celine stepped off the shuttle, They could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on them. A Krenim official rushed forward, his exoskeleton pulsing with stress patterns. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," he reported, gesturing towards the government complex looming in the distance. Obrist and his followers have barricaded themselves inside. They're demanding direct communication with human leadership. Jeremy nodded, feeling his enhanced mind kick into overdrive, processing the information and formulating strategies at lightning speed. "We need to address the Krenim people directly," he said, turning to Celine. "Are you ready?" Celine's antennae quivered with perseverance. "Let's do this!" They were quickly ushered to a makeshift broadcast center, hastily set up in a nearby building. As technicians scrambled to prepare the equipment, Jeremy and Celine stood side by side, their bodies resonating with the harmonized frequencies developed by Dr. Kess. The red light on the camera blinked on, and Jeremy began to speak, his voice carrying the carefully modulated tones that would reach across the divide between their species. To his surprise, he found himself speaking in perfect Krenim, the complex language flowing effortlessly from his enhanced mind. "People of Krenim," he began, his words echoing across the city and beyond. "I come to you not as an outsider, but as a partner in our shared future. The fears and doubts you feel are valid, but they are based on misunderstanding, not fact." Celine stepped forward, her voice blending seamlessly with Jeremy's, in a harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very air. "Look at us," she said, gesturing between herself and Jeremy. "We are living proof that humans and Krenim can not only coexist, but thrive together. The changes we've experienced are not a threat, but an opportunity for growth and understanding." As they spoke, the physiological effects of their broadcast began to spread. On screens throughout the city, they could see Krenim citizens pausing, their agitation giving way to curiosity and then to a sense of calm understanding. Encouraged by the response, Jeremy and Celine continued their address, their voices weaving together in a tapestry of sound that seemed to bridge the gap between their species. They spoke of the potential benefits of cooperation, of the scientific and cultural exchanges that could elevate both their civilizations to new heights. As they concluded their broadcast, a hush fell over the city. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire planet held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, from the direction of the government complex, a communication channel crackled to life. The voice that came through was that of Obrist himself, the leader of the isolationist movement. We would like to talk," Obrist said, his voice wavering with a mix of emotions. "Face to face, no weapons, no backup, just you two." Jeremy and Celine exchanged a look, both knowing the risks involved, but they also recognized the opportunity this presented. "We accept," Jeremy replied, his enhanced mind already mapping out potential scenarios. As they made their way towards the government complex, the streets eerily quiet after the chaos of the past hours, Jeremy felt a sense of purpose unlike anything he had experienced before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that together with Celine, they had the power to shape the future of both their species. The massive doors of the complex loomed before them, slowly opening to reveal the uncertain path ahead. Jeremy reached out, taking Celine's hand in his own. Their fingers intertwined, human and Krenim, a living symbol of the unity they hoped to achieve. With a shared nod of dedication, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited them inside.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.